Hi everyone and welcome to the Empowered You podcast. I'm Javi Israel, your host, speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. After October 7, I found myself in uncomfortable situations, not sure how to respond or navigate. That's why I created the Empowered You, first an organization and now a podcast to equip you with the knowledge, skills and tools surrounding Israel and your Jewish identity. In each episode, we'll explore various topics from multiple perspectives so that you can feel informed, empowered, and proud of who you are. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Hi, Tamas. Hello.
Hi, Javi. So nice to see you.
So nice to see you too. We actually met at the Australian Jewish Funders Combating Anti-Semitism conference.
Exactly. It was I can't believe it's been 3 weeks since then or something like that.
Yeah, ages. No, I know it's ages. Time flies by whether you're having fun or not. It just goes by. But I am so happy that we have this time together. I think that once they hear, firstly, who you are, everyone will realize why it is so special and unique to have you here with us today. So, Tamas, before we begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Don't tell us yet the whole family history just yet. We'll get to that, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Lorincz Tamas, or Tamas Lorincz. I was born in Germany, in East Germany, in 1971. You do the math, long time ago. And I was raised in Hungary. After 30 relatively uneventful years in Hungary, which we are going to talk about, I took to the world and I started traveling. I went to the UK for a few years, then lived in the Middle East for a few years, and moved to Australia 6 years and a month ago. I've been here for 6 amazing years.
Wow. So you have been all over the place.
That was a very short answer. You wanted a short answer.
Well, we're gonna be unpacking that like this whole podcast. Okay, so you were born in Germany, grew up in Hungary, then ended up in England?
Yes, in the UK, yeah.
The UK, then after the UK we've got the United Arab Emirates, is that correct?
Well, I lived in Iraq for a year before I went to the UAE.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. So we've got Iraq, then the UAE, and then Australia.
Yes.
I think you're
Adelaide in Australia.
And look at me. I was texting you about the time, and meanwhile, I'm so Melbourne, Sydney centric. I didn't even realize that the time zone is like, I knew the time zone is different, but it didn't click. So look at that.
Yeah. It's crazy how big this country is. It's always a reminder several time zones.
Yeah, that it's not just Melbourne and Sydney. I know Melbourne and Sydney people, we think we rule Australia or something. I'm joking. Anyway, so you are living in Adelaide, and tell us, what do you do in Adelaide?
I've got the job of my dreams here in Adelaide. I work at the Adelaide Holocaust Museum and Andrew Steiner Education Centre, which is one of the newest Holocaust museums. I can't say we are the newest because since then Brisbane, the Queensland Holocaust Museum opened after us. We have been around since 2020, and I am very proud to be the education coordinator at the museum. So I look after organizing and running the education program of the museum, which is an incredibly beautiful, difficult, but very, very important job. I think this is the job that I've been working toward my whole life.
And how did you get involved?
Very, very lucky. My wife saw the ad for an educator. I've always been a teacher, and I just finished my degree here at the University of South Australia. I retrained from a secondary to a primary teacher because I thought that, if I get this chance, I might as well change a little bit, and instead of teaching high school, I'm teaching primary. And I was in the arduous process of trying to find a job here in Australia as a teacher. And I was a little bit frustrated with the way the education system is organized here. I wasn't very keen on finding temporary relief work and competing with others for relief. Getting to a point where I was a little bit frustrated, and that's when my wife spotted an ad for the educator at the Holocaust Museum. And she was like, "Oh, this is the job for you." And at that time, I didn't get the job. I applied, I didn't get the job. I got the interviews, I found somebody else, and to my luck and to the other persons, I got a phone about half a year later asking me if I was still interested in the job because it became available, and that's how I started working at the museum full time in June 2021. It was always something that I was very interested in and something that I really wanted to know more about. And I also believe that education is beyond just teaching subjects. And to have an opportunity where you talk about really important questions of humanity, of who we are and how we see the world and how we can make the world a better place has always excited me. So when I met Andrew Steiner, the founder of our museum, a Hungarian survivor of the Holocaust, we developed a relationship, and I'm proud to say that it's a friendship as well. And he's become sort of a grandfather figure for me, who just made me realize how important this work might be. He's been doing this work of educating young South Australians since 1980. So he spent 44 years doing this job, and to be able to continue his legacy and continue his message is just an amazing opportunity for me.
Wow, it's a responsibility, it's an honor and a privilege all at the same time. Firstly, Andrew, he must have been, I'm assuming, a child during the war. The fact that he's still alive, thank God, and able to mentor you, that's pretty extraordinary.
It was a sort of a perfect timing in the sense that Andrew initiated the opening of the museum partly because it became obvious to him that the world has not changed. It hasn't become a much better place for people, and for Jewish people especially, and the message is becoming more and more important to share with young people. And he's not as able as he used to be to do this work. He was born in 1933, so he's now 91 years old, 91 and a half years old. He's still going really, really strong. I'm just getting ready to record his testimony this coming week. And he's an incredible man of an inspiring character. He's an artist. He's a visual artist as well. So his artwork is a very important part of his message. And when we met, it was just that perfect point of me wanting to get into Holocaust education, and he looking for someone to continue his legacy. And admittedly, the fact that we can talk Hungarian to each other is a massive help for both of us, because we both lack the opportunities to speak Hungarian, and it gives us a wonderful opportunity to sit down, have a coffee, and talk about the world in Hungarian.
Wow. Amazing. I love that. We would say divine providence brought you two together. And it was the right time. It always has to be the right time. Timing is everything. That is unbelievable. And, you said that you wanted to get into Holocaust education. So I want to now take a step back. We're going to go back to your childhood. Tell us about your parents and tell us about where you really come from. So who are your parents?
Right, so this is where it gets very complicated. So I was born in Germany, I said, but my father is Hungarian, and he met my mother when he was working in Germany, and they fell in love, at a very, very young age. My father was 19, my mother was 18 when I was born.
Oh, wow.
And then after about a year and a half, they moved to Hungary. And I was quite, anecdotally, I know that I was quite traumatized by this move from Germany to Hungary. So it was decided that I was going to be raised Hungarian, not have too much context and connection with my German family. We did visit sometimes. We went for summer visits, but I found myself in Hungary being raised monolingual Hungarian, and we lived together with my grandparents. And I always sensed that there was some conflict, there was some tension within the household between my grandparents and my mother, and I really couldn't figure out what the reason for the conflict and the tension was. There were constant bickering. There was just that very unpleasant bickering going on constantly. My mother, who arrived in my Hungarian-speaking family, spoke no Hungarian at the time, so there was a massive communication problem. So I thought that it might have been that, and then it turned out when I was at the one of the most vulnerable times in your life. I was preparing for my final exams in Hungary in 1989, and I was very worried about my math test, which didn't go well at all. And I was really trying to focus on my exams, and then one of these massive fights between my mother and my grandparents, my grandmother broke out. And in my frustration, I started yelling at both of them about, like, why is this fight going on all the time? Why is this always happening in this family? And then after a while, my mother told me that the reason why they would never get along is because my grandparents are Jewish. That was the first time I ever heard of. This was communist Hungary, so religion and talking about religion was not part of the general conversation anyway. It was pretty aggressively suppressed, talking about religion or talking about people being different. So it really didn't even mean anything to me at the time. But then, of course, she added that they were both Holocaust survivors, that my grandmother had been in Auschwitz and my grandfather was a forced laborer with one of the army contingencies in the Eastern Front. And then I had a vague memory of once finding a photograph as I was looking through family photographs of a man in a uniform, and I asked my mother, and asked my father actually, who that was in that man in the uniform, and said, ask your mother. And I was like, okay. And I asked my mother, and then she explained that it was one of her uncles, and the man was wearing an SS uniform. So as my mother was talking about my grandparents being Holocaust survivors, a memory of this photograph came back, and I realized that I'm in a very interesting historical mixture of being the grandchild of perpetrators and survivors, which was really confusing, confronting, very difficult moment in my life, right? Because I didn't really know how to deal with that whole thing. And I did what many people do, not deal with it at all. For many, many years, I just ignored it.
So was that was the light bulb moment? Like you figured it out. It suddenly, you like remembered this vague photo of an uncle of yours that was wearing an SS uniform. You find out that your grandparents are Jewish and that your grandmother was in Auschwitz. And then it clicked in your brain at that moment right before your exam. Great timing, Mum and Dad.
You know? I was always grateful for that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to blame them for failing that last exam, but I think I should.
Totally. So then you had this like realization, like, holy hell, I've got two sides of me. One side of me that's survivors that went through the hell that they went through. And then the other side of me, I've got the perpetrators, the people who actually did the bad things to, I don't even know how to say it. I guess I'm thinking of saying the oppressed and the oppressor, but I'm trying to stay away from that language because in this context it doesn't sit well with me. But I guess in this you've got the oppressed, the surviving grandparents who went through the Holocaust, and then you've got the oppressors, which is your other side of your family, who are the perpetrators, essentially. Did you, by the way, because you mentioned that your uncle was wearing an SS uniform, but did you know that your actual grandparents, maybe they weren't perpetrators? Like, how did you know that they were actually Nazis? Did you find out later that your grandfather was indeed a Nazi, your mum's dad?
I never really went into the family history of my grandparents. The only thing I know is that the way they met, my grandparents met, which is an indication that my grandfather must have done something, because my grandfather was a prisoner of war. And because of the situation in Germany after the war, there was everywhere in Europe, there was massive labor shortage. So a lot of the lesser criminals were assigned to agricultural labor.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was an agricultural laborer, and my grandmother's parents' farm. There was a farm worker there, and that's how they met. So this is why I assume that he must have been involved in one way or another. And also it raises a very complicated question. We might not want to go down that rabbit hole, but what do we consider a perpetrator? What was the responsibility of every single German who knew, not knew, supported, not supported? It's so difficult to investigate that the culpability of the people who were Germans at the time. I tend to be quite harshly critical, to be honest, because it's also very interesting that it's not only that it was my final exams, it's not only that this whole thing came out there, but it's 1989, which is the fall of communism. Yeah. So I was raised in a communist country which fell apart right in front of my eyes when I was 17, 18 years old. And I saw all the people who had been staunch supporters of the previous regime become these heroes of resistance who were always hiding in the background, trying to bring down the system. And I found it so unbelievable that there was always all this resistance to the system, which went on functioning for 40 years. So I started not just not believing my parents, I started not believing the politicians around me. So it was a massive sort of challenge to who do you trust and who are these people? And it's the same thing with Nazi Germany. Of course, after the end of the Nazi regime, everybody suddenly became a resistance fighter. Everybody became critical of the previous regime. But they weren't, because if they had been, that regime would not have existed.
Wow. We know that history repeats itself in so many ways. Oh my gosh, I've got so many questions. I should have brought my pen so I can write down all my questions before I forget. But I just want to take a moment. For you growing up in such an environment, I can't even imagine. And then finding this out, you probably felt like your whole life was a lie in some ways. That is traumatic within itself. I just want to hold a bit of space for you. I don't know how I would have reacted or responded if I would have been in your situation. I think that you're a superstar. you're unbelievable. And we haven't even gone through your whole life just yet, but look where you're at now. You are amazing. Going to the question of that idea of how do we define who is a perpetrator? I do teach it to my Year 10s, and we see the lead up, Hitler's rise to power, and how things happen slowly but surely, and that Hitler really utilized the youth. No other youth movements were allowed in Germany except the Hitler youth movements. And you see these young, impressionable youth who are really getting indoctrinated and brainwashed, and they genuinely believe that the Jews are the purest of evil. It's everywhere surrounding them in their education, in their youth movement where they hang out and have fun. And they really believe that getting rid of the Jew will create this perfect Aryan race. They're very patriotic and nationalistic towards their motherland, Germany. And I do understand, and I always think if we're in those situations, it's very difficult, and I want to hear your opinion, because I'll never forget reading this diary of a young, impressionable German boy who was a part of the Hitler Youth, and they go for fun to Jewish areas and they loot, destroy, and vandalize, Jewish shops. That was a fun activity of theirs. And accidentally, he actually kills a Jew in the process of doing that. And I wish I remembered his name. I read this a while back, but you see how he writes in his diary that he felt guilty. His moral conscience kicked in and he thought, oh my God, I've done something wrong. But suddenly everybody around him starts celebrating his actions, calling him a hero. He gets all this attention and they say, you did a good thing, you did a good thing. And I see his moral compass suddenly shifting, where he initially had that innate feeling, nah, this isn't right. But because of all the attention that he got and the accolation and this positive reinforcement that you did something right and you've done something for the greater good, suddenly he's like, wait a second, maybe I am a hero. I could see this young impressionable boy, how he could become a Nazi because his moral compass was skewed and his notion of right and wrong actually completely shifted. Can you say that, are they fully guilty? I know that's a loaded. Okay, so tell me why, because I always just think about myself. If that was me, you don't know, you're so young, your environment is a huge part. So tell me why he would be guilty. I want to know.
It is a question that I've been pondering for a long time. I grew up in communist Hungary, so I did what every communist Hungarian did. I was wearing the blue tie, which was for the young communists, and I was wearing the red tie because I was a bit older. Then I was elected the very last year of its existence as the communist youth organization leader in my school, in my class. So I didn't know. I didn't know that I was serving. So that's another part of my experience that I find unique and fascinating. Something that I haven't really processed probably is that how far would I have gone along? And that is going to be a question for me for the rest of my life. I don't know, and nobody ever knows unless you are in that situation. But I don't think that I would have ever been able to go into a ghetto and start beating people up because somebody told me to start beating people up. So I don't think I need to get to murdering somebody before I realize that, maybe I should be murdering people. So I think peer pressure and everything, it's there and it's always going to be there and we want to fit in. And Browning's amazing book about one of the Einsatzgruppen where they're talking about how there was the peer pressure, how they were specifically selected, but they could always choose not to do it. And there were people who would not do what the peer pressure and what the expectation was, and they could get away with not having to be part of Police Battalion 101. So I think living in a totalitarian system makes it harder, because you've got indoctrination, you've got your teachers, you've got your priests, you've got your media telling you but we do have an innate sense of what is right and wrong. And I'm not saying that I would be doing the right thing, but I would be aware of what is right and wrong. And I often think about and talk about the war and culpability and responsibility. And I understand people finding themselves in situations where they end up doing the wrong thing. What I do not find acceptable is people denying it after. So that's where I think that's where I draw my line.
Yeah.
Like hiding for 40 years and pretending that you were just an average soldier and not dealing with the crimes you committed, I find that very, very disturbing. And the people who go out of their way to hide in Australia, hide in Latin America, hide, change their names, change their identities, pretend to be lovely grandfathers and good people for the rest of their... I don't care what a good person you were for the rest of your life if you spend all those decades lying about what you had done. It's not what you did, it's a lying about what you had done. And that's where I draw my line. So that's why I would have liked my grandfather, my German grandfather, not to turn off the television in 1980 when there was a program about the death camps and say that that's all a lie. I wanted him to stand up and say, what did you do? Tell everybody what you had done. Because that's the way you deal with history.
You take ownership and you take responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was thinking of a few things. We know that the Eisengruppen, they were the ones who, in the beginning of the war, would round up Jews. And this is a bit graphic, but for those who maybe might not be entirely aware, this is a trigger warning. They would round up the Jews, essentially, make them strip naked, and then they would just... It was like a mobile killing squad. They just...
Literally. Yeah.
Literally. And then the dead Jews would just pile up, and then there were many Jews who also were alive, and then they would just cover the earth. Also, a lot of local Ukrainians, for instance, would assist very gleefully as well. And in many cases, it says that the earth was moving days after because there were still Jews who were alive that suffocated to death. But we see accounts of the Nazis, of these people specifically, drinking excessively. I don't know about the drugs. I never knew if that was true or not, but they had to be under some form of influence because clearly, and just tapping into that moral consciousness, that obviously, even if they believed whatever they believed, they came to the point where, number one, they had to be under the influence or something. They drank themselves silly every single night. They couldn't deal with it. It was too much for them. And then also they complain. We see complaints where they're like, this is not maintainable, and then this is when, the final solution is put into place. And the concept of gas chambers came in 41 because it was a lot more effective, but also forget about money and all that things for the soldiers, I guess, mental health. It wasn't sustainable to just round up people and do what they were doing, because even the Nazis, they themselves were humans at the end of the day, and it was a huge toll on them. So we see already that humanness to them, I guess. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I think I find the Nazi regime incredibly cynical. I think the Nazi regime was so cynical that it was more of what is financially viable.
Oh, you think so?
Paying was better. If we set up the concentration camps, we can decide whether to murder them or to burn them to death. Because I think I'm having problems with not every camp was a death camp. As we tend to generalize it. There were the death camps and then there were the concentration camps. They were all death camps.
Yeah, they were.
Difference was the timeline. And one of them, in a death camp, the timeline was 10 hours. In a concentration camp, it might have been 6 years. But that doesn't make it less of a death camp, because the ultimate goal was murder. And unfortunately, statistically, we always have enough sociopaths around us who are very willing and very happy to do it. And we've got massive numbers of weak, spineless people who will follow the leader, who will follow the strong man, who will do what they are expected to do. And maybe they will need some alcohol or some drugs to facilitate it. But I don't know how much alcohol or drugs would somebody need to give me or you to be able to do what these people have done. So I don't know. And you know, we are talking about like above a year. That's 30,000 people, not 3 people, not 30 people, not 300, 30,000 people in 2 days. It's shifts of 8-hour shifts of shooting people. I don't know how that is possible, seriously.
Yeah.
And that happened to about 1.5 million people. And most of those people's names we don't know. Most of those people, because people who were taken to concentration camps were registered along the way. There might be some tiny little evidence of their existence. But most of these people coming from those villages that were completely erased, they died without a name, without anything remaining. And that I find the most heartbreaking, most cynical, most awful part of the Holocaust.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I guess it's maybe the Jewish quality sometimes is to have compassion, right? So I always try and be compassionate, and I always try to have the benefit of the doubt. But I agree with you in the way of, no, Javi, we've got right and we've got wrong. We need to have that super, super clear. And in this way, we've got to have that morality. Because if we don't have that morality, then you can go down a very slippery slope. Not that I was in any way, shape or form excusing any of the actions. I was just trying to think about it from a different perspective. I also had family members that were wiped out in the Shoah, in the Holocaust. And for me, you know, this is the purest of all evil, and to hell with all the, with the people who were really involved, actively involved. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm having any compassion on Nazis. I just was looking at it in a maybe...
No, absolutely. And I think that's the healthy way to look at it, because I don't want to perpetuate this hatred and this anger, but at the same time, I don't think we always have to forgive people who don't ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, that's...
Like getting to the point that you ask for forgiveness, and I'm very happy to grant it. It's not in my role, and it's not my job to forgive. But people coming, even if it takes you 5 years, 10 years. But I just cannot imagine the mindset of a person who spent 8 hours shooting Jews in the ditches, and then their solution is to walk away from it and pretend that never happened, and live their lives as if they had not committed that magnitude. I find that really difficult to accept.
And going back, you mentioned how your grandfather, you guys were watching a television documentary about the death camps, and you said that your grandfather, he didn't turn it off and say, let me confess now, like this is kind of true what happened. And so how did, I just want to go back to that, because this is your grandfather.
This is not my memory. It's a memory I heard my father mention at one stage. So I don't remember the actual event, but that was the very short anecdote. In my family, like in many other families, of course, all of these things were never discussed. Like this was, even after the revelation about my grandparents and my history, their Jewish background and their survivor status, this was never discussed any other time. This came up and then it was ignored again. So it wasn't, in an American movie, this would be that climactic moment when everything comes out and people start sharing and discussing. That never happened.
That never happened.
That never happened. It boiled up to the surface and that never happened. But things like little anecdotes like my father mentioning that, oh yes, when your grandfather turned off the television saying that is not, this is all a lie, this never happened, when they were showing a documentary about the Holocaust. So yeah, that's problematic, that kind of attitude. And I think that attitude is there, has always been.
Every human being is 50% their mum, 50% their dad. Have you ever felt like you working as an educator at the Adelaide Holocaust Museum, do you ever feel like you're, in a way, in Hebrew we say tikkun, which is like repairing, but not that you should feel guilt because it wasn't you, but do you ever feel like you're, in some ways, based on this story that your dad said, how your grandpa said this never happened, and now his grandson is actually working in a museum. This did happen and everyone needs to know about it. Do you feel like you're kind of repairing that cycle? Or
that's so interesting. I never actually thought of that, but I think absolutely. I always thought that my role at the museum, I've always seen it more as a penance for my grandparents not sharing their story. My Holocaust surviving, my paternal grandparents never sharing their story. I always saw my role as being the voice that they never felt they had to share their story. But I think you've got a really good point there, and I think that is the other part of my motivation. It's an interesting question I recently started contemplating, because I sort of, for obvious reasons, decided that I was more committed to safeguarding my Jewish grandparents' story and sort of compensating for their silence by me being very vocal. But it's also true. You've got a really good point there, and I do need to reflect on that responsibility of descendants of war criminals sharing their stories and contributing to making the world a better place from that perspective. So yeah, I like that. I like the double mission in that.
Yeah, we call it a tikkun. It's a repairing, and you can repair different generations or different lives, souls. I want to ask your opinions on what's going on currently. But can you tell us about, who you're married to and your children? Because that's also probably going to impact the way that you view the world, I'm assuming, too. So share with us.
Absolutely. So it's so exciting. I love this part of the story because but my background is interesting enough or complicated enough by being the descendant of Holocaust survivors and perpetrators of the Holocaust in one way or another. But I found myself in the United Arab Emirates, where I met a wonderful young woman from Australia. We were introduced by a mutual friend of ours, and we fell in love, and we decided to start a family, and we've got 2 children. She is Lebanese. She's a Lebanese Jew who lives here in Australia, who left Lebanon during the Civil War in the 1980s, went first to the United States, came to Australia afterwards in the late 80s. And our children now have this amazing challenge of trying to comprehend and process this really, really complex genetical heritage of bringing together everything and all the existing and non-existent conflicts in the world are in our children.
Wow. Your children have such a beautiful, diverse background, but that also is challenging in many ways.
It comes with its complications. I think it will make their lives more complicated, but we like complication. I think what makes toward dangerous places when we try to give simple answers to complicated questions. And if my children are raised understanding how complex it is and how complicated it is to be a human being, you will have that compassion, you will have that innate understanding of no situation deserving a yes/no answer, because there are no yes/no answers in the world, and they can never say that. They might have a very strong positive feelings for two sides in a situation.
Yeah, I love being exposed to different people, different backgrounds. I love that diversity. And I guess for me, I did my DNA. I'm 100% Ashkenazi Jewish, as boring as can be. Seriously.
Oh, wow.
And I always think Hitler would have, even though I'm blonde and green-eyed, but I am a Jew through and through and through, and I'm so proud of that, and I love my Jewish identity. But I'm really coming and looking at the world through a very specific lens that's very centric to me, my family, and my background. I always try and expose myself to others. My husband, he's a lot more exciting. He's a bit of Moroccan and Egyptian and Indian and Greek and Italian. I made him do his DNA, and we were like, where are some of these things even coming from we didn't even know about? So he's a lot more exciting. I love showcasing my husband, because the idea of the myth of the monolith, which is what we were discussing at our conference, because people think Jews are like these white European Jews like me. And I always show people a photo of my husband, and people are shocked. I've gotten people say, that's not your husband. And it's actually a surprise to them. Anyway, now I'm digressing. I agree with you that it's scary sometimes. Like we said, we need to have our moral compass. We need to know what is good and bad. Some things in life are black and white, and it is integral to have that binary thinking in that regard, because as soon as you justify murder, violence, rape, that's when the world is going down a slippery slope. I think It's important to have binary thinking in the way of our moral compass and knowing good and evil. But then with regards to other things, which are many other things in life, it's important to have that non-binary thinking of thinking from different perspectives and different angles, and realizing that there are a lot of complexities to a situation, that there's no black and white to most things in life. There's lots of gray. Right now, what's going on to the Australian Jewish community? How do you feel about what's going on?
Well, after Friday morning's attack in Melbourne, it's very difficult to talk about this. The fact that Jewish people in Australia have to think twice, look around before they enter a synagogue, that they have to change their uniforms so that they are not identifiable as members of a Jewish school. It's heartbreaking. This should not happen. No matter what happens in the world, people not feeling safe in their own country is outrageous. I'm really, really disappointed and upset about what's happening. And I just cannot imagine how I would feel if I had to tell my children that they can't wear their school uniform because it exposes them to danger. I can't believe that we live in one of the largest democratic countries with some very proud democratic heritage, where we have to tell the Jews again, Jewish parents tell their Jewish children that, oh, just make sure that you don't look Jewish, you don't do anything Jewish, you're not identified as a Jew, just be Australian, fit in. Try to hide who you are because you are exposing yourself to danger. I find that absolutely unacceptable, and the fact that there is very little done from what I see to control this sense of lack of safety is really, really upsetting. I find it really disturbing. And this has nothing to do, and this should have nothing to do with what is happening 10,000 miles away. That people here don't feel safe is the responsibility of this country and
Yeah.
people of this country. And we have to do better to educate, to find perpetrators, to educate people and to explain why it is not right for them to threaten the safety of people in this country.
I agree with you completely that whatever's going on in the Middle East or wherever in the world should not impact Jews in Australia and their safety, and that is up to the Australian government. But do you feel, in a way, we know that history repeats itself, or I think Eddie Jaku in his book said that history rhymes. Since you're involved in Holocaust education, and we know that Nazi Germany didn't happen overnight, things slowly become acceptable and normalized. And do you ever have this fear, we're heading in that direction again? How do you feel about what's going on in Australia?
I constantly have that feeling. If you look at Australia, or especially if you look outside Australia, if you look at Hungary, where I come from, if you look at the United States, if you look at Australia, I constantly see this constant need of an enemy, because that's basically what it probably, if I had to pinpoint the one worst thing about humanity, about people, is that they always need an enemy, and they are always very happy to embrace the enemy that they are given. And the fact that this enemy turns out to be a Jew for over 2,000 years is mind-boggling. It's fascinating, shocking, how easy it is to go from, there are some Jews in Australia, to crowds of people demanding the gassing of the Jews a few days after a war breaks out 10,000 kilometers away. I think Andrew Steiner, our founder of the books about anti-Semitism being this latent, this dormant thing that's under the surface, but when things go wrong, you can always pull it out. It's the easiest group to target, because we are small, we are scattered around, we don't always agree within ourselves, we are not, because we don't have to be united, because we can be individuals, and we don't, and I feel that it's such an easy hatred to inflame, and people take advantage of it. And of course, it's a cliche, I know, but we can't not talk about the cesspool that is social media. What social media is doing to the voices of hatred, amplifying the voices of hatred, is really, really dangerous. And life is hard. Life has always been hard. I don't understand why people don't understand that life is hard. But your hardship of your life is not the responsibility of another person. It's the consequence of situations around the world. It's the consequence of your own personal misfortunes. I never understood why people need to point at somebody else to blame for things not going well in their lives. Of course, this is life. It's up and sometimes down. I'm sure that no one ever came around and said, thanks the Jews for my life going so well. That never happened.
Yeah.
But my life is going so badly. That's because of the Jews. I don't understand. But we have to keep going, telling people that we are good, and we are no better or no worse than any other human beings. We are just human beings.
We're just humans. Well, we learned in our conference how anti-Semitism, it doesn't work like other bigotries. It's unique, because a Jew can be on top of the world, so to speak, and be part of the highest upper echelons of society one day, and the next drop. It's not like how other bigotries work. And the idea of anti-Semitism is the world's oldest conspiracy theory, and finding a scapegoat, the Jew, and that's just how it's been. And we could have a whole conversation of why that is. It is super fascinating. But anti-Semitism is what I would call a law of nature in some ways. From when I look at history, it seems like it is.
It's a virus. It's a virus. It spreads like a virus. It behaves like a virus. It goes dormant, then it inflames, then it goes dormant, but it never actually goes away.
And so do you ever feel like, hey, who's to say that another Holocaust, God forbid, won't happen again?
I am fascinated by the phony war. You know, after the 1st of September 1939, 90% of the world went on like normal. It was those few million people in Poland who suffered, but the rest of the world was just, it's fine, it's going on. So I don't know if we are already in that situation. I don't know if in a history book in 2224, we are not going to have a chapter on World War III, which broke out on the 7th of October 2023. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like every time I'm enjoying life, and it's terrible, but it happens that every time I catch myself thinking, I'm having such a great time, but we might already be in a war situation. So I find it not impossible, and I'm not just talking about another Holocaust happening, but another global war happening that's going to destroy everything that we have built up in the last 3,000-4,000 years. In that sense, I feel that we don't know because we don't have the perspective. We only have our tiny little lives, and we don't know what is happening outside. We know that there is a war everywhere, and I'm super confused about what's happening in Syria right now. That's only been happening for 2 days, but what is going on there? Who are these rebels and what are they doing? And the whole situation just becomes so much more volatile. So I don't know. I really don't know what the answer to that question is. I fear that there is an escalation. There has been an escalation, which makes it more and more likely that we are going to turn on each other.
Sorry. No, I asked you that question, and I have to be honest with you. I think quite similarly to you. And also when I'm having a good time, I always think about there's hostages that are in tunnels in Gaza. Like for me, that's what I'm thinking of straight away.
Absolutely.
But we know that history does repeat itself in many ways. And who is to say that another world war won't break out, God forbid? None of us. But what gives me actually some comfort and the fact that I can sleep at night is actually knowing that I have Israel. And that I, as a Jewish person, have a safe haven and a place of refuge that I can go to no matter what. And you might say, but Israel, it's surrounded by enemies and their terrorist attacks and rockets and all those things. But I'd rather be with my people surrounded by enemies than be in a foreign country surrounded by enemies. And that is a source of comfort, knowing that as a Jewish person, that I have the state of Israel. That for me is my saving grace. And God too. I'm a religious Jew. God, totally. We haven't forgotten about you, God. But from a pragmatic perspective, the fact that I have Israel to go to, and I know that some people might say, oh, well, all the rise of anti-Semitism is because of Israel. To me, it's just another excuse. Trust me, even if we didn't have Israel, these things would still be happening. They would find a different avenue. Anti-Zionism is a disguise 90% of the time for anti-Semitism, I personally believe.
It really is very, very tricky when somebody is using anti-Israel slogans or anti-Israel rhetoric. Where is that line between anti-Israel and anti-Semitism? I'm a very staunch. I really think that the nation state was one of the worst ideas ever. I think establishing this idea of the nation state in the 1800s, it's a new idea, and we've done so much damage just because we told one country that they are better than another country, and then this feeling could be exploited, but at the same time, I mentioned Iraq. I lived in Iraq, and when I say Iraq, I actually lived in the north of Iraq in the Kurdish territories, which is another people without a nation state, another people which has a terrorist organization fighting the worst way for the nationhood of the Kurdish people, but they don't. They are fighting for their nationhood in a way that does not question the existence of other countries. They don't try to destroy Iran or Turkey or Iraq or Syria. They are trying to create a nation state that does not negate the existence of another nation state. And I think that is a very, very important difference. And when I look at the way the Kurdish people are trying to create their autonomy and create their own nation state, is not flawless, because it's never going to be flawless, and it's never going to be unanimous, and there's always going to be infighting, but it's not by negating the existence of another nation state. And I find that really a really important comparison, and for me that's such an important comparison. I lived with the Kurdish people, and I love the Kurdish people, and I do believe that they deserve a country they can call their own. And I think every nation deserves that, but not at the expense, and definitely not at the slogan of destroying another country.
Okay, we're talking a bit in riddles. So what are you trying to say in comparison to Israel? You could be honest, a bit confused.
I'm saying that I think the whole idea of the nation state is wrong. But if we have to have nation states, and that's the way we are going, we need to find ways in creating people's nation states without destroying or questioning the existence of another nation state. So running a terrorist organization which tries to destroy a legitimate democratic state, the state of Israel, is wrong. We should not in any way support a terrorist organization exploiting the hardships of the Palestinian people to destroy Israel, to question the legitimacy of Israel. Yes. I hope that was a bit more clear. I didn't want to be obscure about it. I absolutely believe that Israel is a country that has to stay where it is. It has to stay. I just wish that there was a way of and I don't wish. I know that there is a way. There is a way to make this work. There are so many amazing examples in the world where people of different backgrounds, people who are sometimes even conflicting backgrounds, can live together, and totally. That's a possibility.
Totally. No, I wasn't sure in what way you were looking at it with regards to Israel. I was trying. No, that's okay. But that makes sense what you're saying. The idea of that two nation states can exist together, and that they don't need to use terrorism and violence. You know?
Exactly.
And I agree with you completely. And I think that most Jewish people who live in Israel, I can say for my friends and for my family, we pray for peace, we crave peace, and all we want is peace. And we are more than happy to live with everyone and anyone who comes from that region in peace. You don't even have to get along with each other or like each other or align on everything, but just the idea of we can live in peace, we don't need to kill each other, is something that we strive for and we believe in with all our hearts and soul, completely. And I genuinely believe that the state of Israel has that intention. Israel didn't start this war that we're currently in. Israel didn't ask for this war. Israel didn't want this war. This was a war that was literally imposed on Israel, where since the Holocaust, this was the biggest day of murdering of Jews. And they didn't just murder, they kidnapped and raped and mutilated horrible things. And there's an amazing documentary called We Will Dance Again. It's on Paramount Plus. You can get it for free. It's done really well. And you just hear testimonies of different survivors who survived the massacre. Or Screams Before Silence, also done really well. That could be accessed online for free. So it's important to hear these stories and realize that no other country would allow such a attack to happen and not defend themselves. For me, that's a huge part of the puzzle, to go back specifically to October 7th.
Absolutely. Well, not like, but one of the big light bulb moments for me about the attack on the 7th of October was the comparison of the population, like what population size that was attacked, and if you extrapolate that to a bigger country, you would understand the magnitude of what happened. And I think what I really find very hard is that sense of betrayal, that it's the people who were living amongst, who were invited in, who were part of everyday life, who were coming in and out and were working in Israel and were part of the community, were contributing. They could be turned into murderers. I just find that sense of betrayal so devastating, that this could happen. So yeah, absolutely. That attack is going to live in our collective conscience for a long time, and I think it's done so much damage to the situation. And yeah, like I don't think that there is any question that this demanded and deserved a response. There had to be a response. No other sovereign country would have taken an incursion of this kind. That's an act of war.
I think for me also, and you can call this intergenerational trauma, coming from Holocaust survivors and being a Jew, once upon a time, when people would attack Jews, they got away with it, and they could get away with it because it didn't matter if Jews were part of the highest echelons of society or super wealthy. It didn't matter. At the end of the day, people really got away with murdering Jews. And this is from my perspective and my angle. The fact that we have the state of Israel is huge because Jewish blood isn't cheap, just like no blood is cheap, by the way. No human blood is cheap. But this idea of when you attack with such barbarity, there will be consequences. And like we said, no other Western democratic country would ever allow such a thing to happen to their citizens. But this Jewish feeling of we can defend ourselves, and not in a way of being immoral or unethical. I have my belief system, as I'm sure you know from our conference, but the idea of we can actually defend ourselves. And this, for Jewish people, is super unique because we were never in a situation like that. We were the ones who were getting persecuted, discriminated, and killed. And it was what it was. It is, there was nothing more that we could really do. At the end of the day, we were at the mercy of other governments who could easily turn against us.
Absolutely. That's been the history of the Jewish people have been being expelled from one country and moving to another country, settling down until you're kicked out from there. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible that this could happen. And it is unparalleled. And you're absolutely right that it's such an important reassurance that you can't do that with the whole, because no one's going to kick the Jews out of Israel because that is home.
Yeah.
And it's such an important statement because how many times were the Jews expelled from England? Several times. They were just so pack up and leave. 4 Jews out of here in 2 months. Or the Jews who escaped during the Tsarist Russia, the ones leaving Spain because a king decided that, I can't milk the Jews anymore, let's kick them out. And you can't do that anymore.
The 850,000 Jews that were also ethnically cleansed out of all the Arab and Muslim lands. And
absolutely.
That's my husband's family's story, and I feel like their story doesn't get enough coverage. Where Holocaust. But my husband's family, who had been living in Egypt, kicked out within 2 days, not allowed to sell their homes, not allowed to take out any assets. Jews who were part of, government and successful Jews who were being hung in the streets, and they had to leave within 2 days with 2 suitcases, literally, boom. It's a whole story how they ended up in Australia, and they came to a new country with nothing but the clothes on their back, essentially, and they had to start from scratch. But that is this collective Jewish story, which is ingrained in me. And so finally, we have our homeland where we can return to if need be. And it is home. I'm a very proud Australian, but Israel will always be my home first and foremost. And when I went to Israel for the first time, I felt that sense of home as a Jew, and as a religious Jew especially. All those biblical connections, and also ancestral, a big, huge part of my ancestry. My great-great-grandpa came to Israel. He was a famous rabbi in the 1600s. So my great-grandmother, who's my namesake, was actually born in Jerusalem in 1903. She was a Yerushalmi Jew. So I can actually trace my family ancestry in the region all the way back to the 1600s. I'm not just saying this, Tamas, but if I did not have Israel, I would be afraid. I would be afraid right now. I would say, I don't know what the future will be for my children or my grandchildren. And this idea of making aliyah and looking up, if we would move to Israel, where would we go? This is something that many Jews in Australia, I can say, it's become a real realization for many of us, including myself. And I'm super young. I'm a 26-year-old. I've got my whole future ahead of me. I grew up in Australia. Australia has been so kind to me, and I love Australia, and I've gone through the education system here, and I've done uni here, and I'm settling my roots. But now I can't lie to say that Israel is not on the forefront of my mind, being a Jew in this current climate.
And also there is the feeling that you want to be there to help. I wouldn't say positive, but one really heartwarming element. The community has come together. Before the attacks, there was a lot more stress. There was a lot of division, and how people have come together and how people have been helping each other and looking out for each other is really heartwarming. It's a really beautiful thing to see, even though this is awful, but people come together. And I understand why this is, because I would find it difficult to remain loyal to Australia in the current situation. You don't know which synagogue is the next, and you don't know what is going on, and where is support coming from. It's not just ticking boxes, not just slogans, and then go to the UN and then we vote in interesting ways. I can see how this is really very difficult.
And just to end things off, we've had such a great conversation, pretty intense but good, and I love real conversations. But what hope do you have for the future?
Well, I'm an educator and I believe in learning. I always believe in the future generations. We have an amazing young generation growing up. We dismiss them often. We dismiss Gen Z, Gen X in so many ways, but I think the way they think, the way they act. I've got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old daughter, and the way they think and the way they see the world is something that gives me a lot of hope. We're on an average year with about 4,000 students, and to see that even if it's just 10% of those kids who responds to what we talk about, to the stories that we share with them, they take home those stories and they will say, I met a Jew. He was a lovely old man and he told us our story and we loved him and it was nice to us. And we are doing the good work of educating, of talking to people, celebrating our diversity. What I always, I think one of your questions was about my Jewish identity, and my Jewish identity is not religious, but it's this love of the diversity, of that beauty of that room where we spent 3 days together, of people coming from all sorts of backgrounds, of all sorts of identities, of all sorts of interpretations of what it means to them to be a Jew, and to be together in that room. I didn't talk about it much at the time or since, but it was transformational for me. It was going in a space where you just feel comfortable with the people who are there. And that was incredible. So diversity brings us together and makes us appreciate each other even more. And I think that's what keeps me hopeful.